Welcome to the Authentic Cinema Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Barron. I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Bob Lyren. Today we're going to be talking about Gillo Pontecorvo's 1966 masterpiece, The Battle of Algiers. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing good. I'm ready to get into the film.
I can't remember wanting to talk about a movie so badly.
Yeah, it's also probably one of the more intimidating films that we've talked about from my point of view, just because there's so much you can talk about and the film is so important.
Absolutely. We wanted to kind of announce that this is going to be part of a series, will be an ongoing series that we're going to call One Battle After Another, where we're going to kind of talk about authentic war films. And this would be episode one Battle After Another, The Battle of Algiers, which will be our kickoff for this.
Yeah, I think that The Battle of Algiers it really is like a one-of-one film. A lot of films have been inspired by The Battle of Algiers, a lot of filmmakers. This is one of those films that every great film director has seen. Battle of Algiers, has been influenced by the Battle of Algiers. And so it was always on my short list. I think that it's like the kind of film that it always has something to offer wherever you are in your life. Like, you and I actually had a similar experience. The first time we both watched it, not together, but separately, but the first time we both watched it, you mentioned something that was true for me as well, which is like, I respected it totally. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Like, I totally get it. But like, not totally get it. I totally get why it's so respected and such an important film, but it didn't really seep in. And then, you know, I saw it again, like maybe 5 or 6 years later, and I had a slightly more involved reaction. And the older I get, or the more time that passes, and every time I revisit it, just like more of what it is or what it could be kind of hits me. And I think that that's really kind of a testament to not only its authenticity, but its place in kind of cinema history.
The first time I saw it, I remember I probably saw it because it was in the press, because the Pentagon was screening it to kind of figure out the counterinsurgency in Iraq. And I remember thinking at the time, like, Jesus, that's really hardcore. Like, what is this movie, you know? And it didn't, if I'm really honest at that time, I don't think it properly sunk in. And I would say that I had not seen it since then. And then you brought it up for this podcast and I watched it this time around and it hit me like a ton of bricks.
I think the reason is because not only is it an amazing achievement cinematically, it's an amazing film, which we're going to, you know, every time we do this podcast, I always want to talk about how the film was made. This is the crown jewel of how the film was made. But beyond that, I think that it also, which puts it in pretty rare company, it serves as like a cultural and historical text that still resonates today.
It's almost like it's resonating more and more.
Right. You know, the fact that this movie was made during the Vietnam War and then 40 years later was screened at the Pentagon right before we invaded Iraq. I mean, like, and then every armed conflict in between could basically draw back to something like this film.
It's now a part of the curriculum, if I'm not mistaken, at the U.S. Army War College.
And the flip side, like, this movie was adopted by underground guerrilla liberation style movements all over the world. They are also studying this film. So it's like, on one hand, we have the military industrial complex trying to break this film down. And then you've got like guerrilla warfare groups in underground layers also watching this film. And that's kind of, you know, that's the beauty.
Well, and that's what I think reveals kind of the power of this film. And I think one of the things we really want to talk about with this film is just how incredibly dangerous this movie is.
It's really a great word. Yeah. It's dangerous. It is. Yeah. It is a dangerous movie.
I mean, it's a film that, you know, people are literally actively like studying this film because it is useful.
Right.
It's useful to both sides. And that's what's so interesting about it, because, and it's kind of like one of my sort of theses of the film, and why I think it was so important that it was shot in a neorealist style, which we'll get into, is that it is an act of kind of anti-propaganda, actually. It's trying to strip out any kind of ideological framework for me. This is not a film that's going to tell you what to think at all. It's not going to tell you to pick a side. It doesn't have clear good guys and bad guys. I have a way of framing the conversation, but before I do that, I always just want to ask the quintessential ACP question, which is what was it that made you want to talk about this film now?
Originally, when I watched One Battle After Another, which you and I talked about, you know, we did our sideline just our sideline podcast, which is essentially just a phone call where we talk about movies.
We have a
We were
private
talking-
members-only podcast.
We were talking a lot about One Battle After Another, and that just the feelings and vibes of that movie, and that conversation extended to a bigger political conversation about just the current state of politics in the U.S. and in the world. And one of the things that I lamented to you is that, like, is it even possible to be part of an underground movement anymore? Like,
Yeah.
do those even exist? Can you still be a guerrilla? Like, you hear stories about, World War II or Algiers or anywhere, like, where they're like these guerrilla fighters that were ostensibly for years, they were like the resistance to this occupying force or this war. And we were talking about, like, is that even possible anymore? I mean, like, with the way the world is now, it almost seems like those kind of groups, not intellectually, but like physically, literally, like, not that you want to kill people, but like, can you be a part of a movement any longer?
Could something like that even exist now?
Yeah.
Do we even know what that looks like? Because that's what hit me about One Battle After Another, that really, when I walked out of the theater, I was like, wow, Paul Thomas Anderson is introducing this image of revolution now to, like, millennials, Gen Zs. This is kind of their first glimpse of what a revolution might actually look like in reality. I mean, I think that One Battle After Another is not nearly probably as realistic. I mean, it's not a work of neorealism like Battle of Algiers is, but it does present a pretty believable kind of realistic portrayal of kind of the costs of revolution, what that would really look like. That's really dangerous image to introduce into the consciousness of the public in 2025 in our sort of current political reality.
Yeah, when we had that kind of conversation, obviously there's a reference to the Battle of Algiers in One Battle After Another, and it was always on my mental short list of films that we could do, and I went back and watched it and was really, again, it didn't do much to quell that kind of feeling I had, because this one is all about, a network of liberation, liberation fighters versus, the occupying force. And so, yeah, that's why we're talking about it today. But you mentioned that you had a way that you kind of wanted to frame at least the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah. So, like, I wanted to do kind of like a thought experiment. Imagine you're a typical American moviegoer in 1966 and the Battle of Algiers screens for you.
Right.
The typical American audience member did not have the, like, conceptual toolkit yet to deal with what was being presented to them in this film. For example, I know we look back at, like, the 1960s, that's when sort of the American New Wave started. But again, this was still not quite there yet. You know what I mean?
No,
like, those films would kind of more take hold in the late 1960s and 1970s.
Early the 70s, right?
Yeah.
So all those people that were the authors of the American New Wave in American cinema, they saw the Battle of Algiers when they were like 18, 19 years old. They were seeing it. So So still, really, most mainstream films in 1966 are being shot on studio lots. This film is being filmed 100% on location, handheld. The film is being degraded intentionally to look like newsreel footage. Right.
Most American films or studio pictures at that time are very much on a studio set in Hollywood.
Yeah, glossy.
They're glossy, they're Technicolor. In Westerns at that point, they're usually taking white guys and putting makeup on them to make them look like Native Americans, whereas this film is being filmed and performed by actual, not only members of the actual Algerian community, many of whom had actually lived through the events that will be portrayed in the film. Some of the leading people on the film, like Sadi Youssef, for example, were actual members of the FLN itself. Like, he was a colonel in the FLN, and I want to talk about him later. But the other thing we have to think about that must have just been so unbelievably hard to comprehend at that time was most war films at the time were still being sort of framed within this kind of mythological World War II kind of context. There are clear good guys and there are clear bad guys. And the good guys are defined by their sacrifice and their courage. And the good guys always win. And the bad guys are clearly defined as being, like, sort of unquestionably evil, kind of ruthless, totally ruthless, and morally cowardly. It's still the world of, like, John Wayne. This is a film where there is absolutely not a clear distinction between who is a good guy, who is a bad guy. You might think for a while, well, maybe, it's the story of the Algerian Revolution. Maybe we're supposed to side with them. But then you're going to watch women plant bombs and perform acts of terrorism and murder innocent people.
Right.
There's this like absolute lack of what I'm calling like ideological guidance, right? You're not told in this film, like, who's good, who's bad. Both sides are absolutely vicious and ruthless. Both sides do terrible, terrible things. It's just not clear. I think it opens up a lot of things for discussion. Like if you put yourself in that seat in 1966, this must have just been like absolutely radical. Like it must have been cinematically kind of like what happened with the Beatles or something in a way.
I think you're absolutely right. And it's funny that it's happening around the same time.
Just keep in mind, it's really before mass protests against the Vietnam War. Okay.
Right.
It's really before that kind of like moral failing and moral kind of ambiguity. And that hasn't really been explored, particularly in American cinema
Right.
yet.
Which is even more frightening because this movie came before all that. Okay. So like,
right. Yeah.
And so I think to your point, I think that in the history of American cinema, like it was never meant to, it was always meant to entertain us. And the
American cinema was kind of, built
American
to
cinema was built to entertain, and it was built to, intentionally or unintentionally push the ideals of American culture that were shaped by real world events like World War II. We were not as audience members or as consumers, we were not used to this idea of like truth in cinema.
Yes.
And to your point, I guess the short answer to your question is yes. In 1966 in Venice, or when this movie came over in 1967 to the United States and they started showing it, like it was rocking people's worlds. Because what Pontecorvo did, I think that just really the brilliance of like the formal symmetry of the film, that this film is not presented. It's the antithesis of what you just described of American cinema in the 1960s. There is not a clear good guy and bad guy. There is no clear lines. The whole point of the film is to show you what happens when things are totally symmetrical, as they really are. Ideas about terrorism and about violence and political violence and
torture,
occupation and torture, and like. And we can go down a rabbit hole on any one of those. But, this idea that like what Pontecorvo is basically saying, or what the film kind of said to me, is like, why is violence either terrorism or security? You can't divide those two things. And that's kind of like when he asked that question, I think there was just so much truth and honesty in the way that the film was made that you're right, it probably rocked people's worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about the way the film was made, because Pontecorvo, he was a resistance fighter in Italy in World War II. He was a Jewish Italian and actually ran some like insurgencies himself.
Right.
So he's operating from a world that he has operated in before. He got into filmmaking because I think he saw the film Paisan by Roberto Rossellini, which is an example of Italian neorealism. And that inspired him to start making films. He started to develop his own philosophy that he would later call the Dictatorship of Truth, which put a pin in that for a second. But the Battle of Algiers is a really classic example. It's actually a masterwork of neorealism. And what is neorealism? It's not an attempt to recreate reality perfectly, right?
No.
Because that's impossible. So I kind of thought of a different way of thinking about neorealism, which is it's actually like an act of kind of radical authenticity. It's using reality as a constraint, using reality to tell the story. So it's like, I like to think of neorealism as like an organic form of filmmaking.
When this film was released, they had to put a disclaimer in the beginning of the film that said, this film contains no documentary footage. Everything in this film is staged. This is a movie. This is not a documentary. We did not use newsreel footage of a cafe bombing. And, I was talking earlier about filmmakers. This film is on the list of all like filmmakers like Spielberg and Soderbergh and Spike Lee and Oliver Stone and Paul Thomas Anderson. Like they all point to this film, what he was able to capture in reality, like you said. And to kind of bring it back to what I was saying earlier is like, it's not just a film. It's also like a map of like culture and history. And I think that by incorporating those ideas into the film makes it radically authentic, like you were saying. And when you strive for that kind of radical authenticity, you're going to get something like the Battle of Algiers.
Right. You're drawing the story from the location and community and conditions of the story itself. You're not attempting to recreate it somewhere in a studio. You're going to the place, working with the community that was actually involved in the events, literally casting them in the film. You're shooting in the location where the events actually happened. You're using techniques that capture the authentic experience and tell the story from an authentic point of view. Pontecorvo lived in Algiers for 2 years while making this, embedded in the community itself. He worked with Sadi Yassef, who plays the insurgent colonel named Jafar. And Sadi Yassef was a colonel in the FLN. He had been sentenced to death 3 times by the French government, got out of it somehow. And then later wrote a book about it. And then he's a producer on the film too. He was able to bring the community in though. He was able to get the sanction of the Algerian government. They loaned the tanks. But the idea here that I'm touching upon is that the community participates in the telling of the story itself.
Right.
And what that does, it strips out all the mythologizing, all the ideological guidance. It removes the propaganda. It's not telling you this big heroic story about these insurgents that, liberated Algeria.
Or we're not making a big sweeping story about
Right.
a military that's going to squash these terrorists.
Exactly. Exactly. One thing that I think is really interesting is Pontecorvo talks a lot about being obsessed with faces, people that have the right faces. He's looking for authentic faces. So he went to Sadi Yassef and he wanted to cast Sadi Yassef, again, plays Jafar in the film. And he said, you've got this great face. And Sadi Yassef said something that I think was really enlightening and insightful. He said, he asked me to do this and he goes, I'm not an actor. I don't know anything about filmmaking, but I decided to take the role because it would allow me to keep an eye on them and make sure that they didn't start to romanticize anything.
Right. You can look at the things that Pontecorvo didn't do. There's no hero shots. There's no dramatic slow motion moment where we're cutting, okay?
There's no stylization, right?
Yeah, and by removing those things, you're keeping it radically authentic and it has to be real. I would just want to point out before I forget, because I'll forget it, to any of our listeners out there, any younger listeners, if you want to know if a movie is radically authentic, if it was ever banned from the public, you're onto something. And this movie was banned in France for 6 or 7 years after it was made because the French government did not want people to see this. Why? Not because it paints the French military or the French government as the bad guys. No, it's because this is so real and so radically authentic that it's dangerous. This is dangerous for people to watch because there's no flourish to it. There's no good guy, bad guy. It's cinematically and thematically symmetrical.
Yeah. This neorealist style, it's a bottom-up style of filmmaking instead of a top-down style of filmmaking. What Pontecorvo is meticulously doing in this film is removing any kind of stylization. Because anytime you make a stylistic, aesthetic choice to stylize something, then you're pointing to it. And then you're starting to ideologically inform the movie. You're telling the audience what to think. There's none of that in this film. Right. It's almost documentary-like in its portrayal of what's happening because what it's attempting to do, it's not telling you what the truth is. It's revealing the truth. You brought up symmetry, and I wanted to talk about it because I think that Pontecorvo himself has a mirror image in the film, and I think that is Colonel Mateu, the paratrooper, and he's played by Jean Martin, who...
He's the only real actor in the film.
He's the only professional actor cast in the film. And I think that the character of Mateu is fascinating because, like Pontecorvo, he actually never tells us what to believe. What he does is very similar to what I think Pontecorvo's doing. He's actually just explaining why things are happening and how things are happening. But he's not saying things should happen. He explains the phases of how a revolution works. He's measuring, but he's never taking a moral position. And there's that press conference torture scene where the press are grilling him about torturing people. And there's this great moment where he basically throws it back. And what he's doing is he's throwing it back on us as the audience. He says, look, we are just a tool of the French political will. The French want to be in Algeria. The Algerians don't want us in Algeria. Even in the communist newspapers are arguing that we should be in Algeria. So if you decide that we need to be in Algeria, then basically this is the only way that we're going to be able to remain in Algeria.
Right.
The military is not making this decision. This goes back a level farther. In the character of Matteo, I see Pontecorvo, actually. He's the guy that's literally conducting all of the operation and making sure that it's happening. But he never takes like this moral position. Like Pontecorvo, he never tells us what to believe. He doesn't say the French should be in Algeria.
Right. There's like two levels, and that's the beauty of what Pontecorvo did. There's not a moral stance by the colonel. We talked about this symmetry, and through that symmetry, there's a neutrality.
Yeah.
That neutrality creates like a moral distance. There's nowhere for me to stand in this film. I can't stand with either side. That's like the brilliant thing about it, is like the violence, it doesn't feel justified, but it doesn't feel meaningless either.
Yeah.
It's both. That's the real beauty of what Pontecorvo was able to do within the story and for the viewer, was to create this kind of moral distance where the viewer doesn't know where to come down on this.
He's trying to look at it lucidly, just clearly. What he ultimately is doing, and again, I think this is sort of the counterintuitive way that this film is like actually so dangerous, is he's putting the moral responsibility in you as the viewer.
Right.
And that's what's so unbelievably uncomfortable.
One of the themes or ideas in this film is this idea of like terrorism. The FLN, they're called terrorists. Why? Well, they use violence to target civilians and create an atmosphere of fear. If you asked me, like, what's terrorism? I'm like, it's like when you are trying to achieve a political end through violence and fear, okay? Yeah. They operate outside of a state structure. This isn't Germany versus America in World War II. This is an unsanctioned group of people. They don't have international recognition, and they're carrying out acts of violence within their community among civilians, okay? So you're like, boom, they're the terrorists. I'm like, hold up, wait a second. Because then we're going to flip it over to the French military. What do? Well, they use torture systematically. Like they're just torturing people. They execute people without a trial. They impose curfews and impede on people's civil liberties and their freedoms. And kick down doors out of their homes. Okay, wait a second. No, they're the terrorists. Okay, wait a second. Yeah. And so the idea is like I said before, it's like, why is one of those things called terrorism? And I think that the answer is, well, who's in power? Because who's in power, the other person are terrorists. That's what he's saying, is that he's presenting it not as good guys versus bad guys. He's showing you that there is no answer here.
Right. If you attempt to take a moral position within that space, you're immediately going to get lost, because both sides are engaging in the same game. They're both competing for narrative, how their story is going to be told within this conflict, right? So you have to step back a step farther and say, well, what causes this? One of the things that this film made me think about, I had read an essay last year by John Berger on a photo of Che Guevara after he had been killed. Che Guevara laid out on a table. It's just a fascinating photo because you have Che Guevara's like exposed, naked, dead body. And then we always think of that very famous sort of propagandistic image of Che Guevara, the poster that's on everybody's T-shirts. This film it's very much the Che Guevara on the table, the exposed naked truth. The CIA took that photo and released it because they wanted to show that they were able to contain the insurgency, shatter that poster image of Che Guevara. It didn't work. And one of the reasons it didn't work is that what you see when you look at that dead body, you see the possibility, right? That revolution actually is a real thing, the real weight, the real stakes, the real meaning. These people were willing to do terrible fucking things, awful, horrible, ruthless things. They're willing to murder people. You think of the romantic view of the revolutionary, I'm willing to die for this cause. That's profound, but you also have to be willing to kill.
Right. And not just an enemy in a uniform. It's like you have to be willing to kill within your community.
What's the first thing they do? Phase one of the revolution is they cleanse their own community.
Right.
They get rid of all the gangsters, the prostitutes, the drunks.
Right. Well, it's funny that you brought up Che Guevara, like, because when you look at Ali LaPont, it's very similar. Ali LaPont is the authentic representation of what Che Guevara was in the moment, okay? Ali LaPointe is not presented as like a charismatic revolutionary hero.
No.
He's illiterate. He's impulsive. And what I find most fascinating about the portrayal is he's often frightened. Okay. He's constantly on edge and afraid. He kind of grows into the political consciousness, but it doesn't come from like an ideological idea. It comes from a place of repression, from anger and desperation. And much like Che Guevara, how Ali's story ends. Again, it's not heroic. It's not like this beautiful hail of gunfire as he's trying to take a hill or plant a flag. It's brutal and just, it's forgotten. Like we just move on. That's it.
He's hiding out in a wall.
Yeah, like a rat. Liberation is not romantic. It's claustrophobic, like you said. It's desperate. It's very dangerous.
It's dehumanizing, right? Which is really strange because these revolutions often start, particularly if you think about it in the context of colonialism, it's a demand for recognition.
Right.
What happens to Ali LaPointe in the beginning? He gets tripped by those French kids and they make fun of him on the ground and he's humiliated. And it's symbolic of what the Algerian people are feeling.
Right.
And he gets up and he fucking punches the guy in the face. And throughout the whole film, the Algerian side is always doing things to get the attention and recognition of the United Nations.
Right.
When we say recognition, we should say to see us as fully human. We're being treated as second-class citizens in our own society.
Right.
But the great tragedy of the revolution, and I think we should be clear, we're talking about violent revolution.
Yes.
Specifically, that when you make that move to engage in violent revolution, you, the participants of the revolution, are going to give up your own humanity.
It kind of like, for me at least, it leads into like a conversation about the crucial sequence in the film, which is the cafe bombing sequence.
Yeah.
The most famous sequence from the film. For me, it's not a scene because my favorite part of that whole sequence is when the three women are getting ready and they go to see the bomb maker. For me, you could make a whole movie just about that guy. Like, who is that guy? It's fascinating.
It's kind of like a film within the film.
It is. We were talking about Pontecorvo and how by creating a moral distance, he provides no escape for the viewer. There's nowhere for you to go in this. And that scene, I think, kind of embodies that idea.
Yeah.
The first thing is like how much time they spend humanizing the people around. They're not anonymous. They're at a cafe, like they're dancing, they're putting quarters in the jukebox. The guy at the bar tries to offer to buy her a drink. It's very human interaction. And we as the viewer know what's going to happen to these poor people. He's taking a moment to be like, yeah, these are just normal, everyday people, just like you, hanging out at a bar. The other thing about the scene is the women themselves. They're not evil women. They look like your mom. They look like your auntie.
Yeah.
That scene, I think, kind of encompasses a lot of what the whole film is about. The neutrality of the situation, about not providing an escape for the viewer, and also showing the lengths that you have to go in a revolution. They are bombing a cafe in their community.
I mean, they're bombing in the French side of town, not
Right.
the Algerian side.
Yeah, they're not in the
to your
Casbah.
point,
Yeah.
but they're not bombing people that have done anything to them personally.
They're not soldiers, right?
Exactly. They're just killing innocent people. And I think what you're touching upon is the moral complexity of this scene, right? So you could look at it from one point of view and you could say, these women are unbelievably courageous. The risk that they're taking, sneaking bombs through military checkpoints, putting their own children on the line to walk through these military checkpoints. They've got this dangerous bomb in their basket. That takes a level of commitment and courage. If we were watching like a classic John Wayne like commando film and the women in Nazi occupied France sneaking basket bombs to go bomb a cafe with German officers in it, we would unquestionably say, look how brave those women are. So this moral neutrality that we're talking, this lucidity of the event, we're looking at this and part of us is going like, wow, like they're really brave. But then the other side of it is like, it's an act absolutely of terrorism.
Right.
And they know that it's an act of terrorism. Later, the intellectual guy, Ben Heedy, says to LaPointe, this is just a necessary phase. We can't do terrorism forever. But that's an incredibly like ruthless calculation.
Right. And I think that the cool thing about the cafe cafe bombing sequence is how it's mirrored with the other bombing sequence, which comes before.
It's before the military arrives.
Right. You've got a bunch of middle class or upper middle class people at like a dinner party, and they're like, the music's playing and they're having drinks, and the woman's like, does anybody need a drink? And then like the dude shows up, he's like, hey, we got to go. And he's like, oh, hold on, honey. We have to go take care of something. Just the casualness with which they do it. It's important to remember in the cafe bombing sequence, what happened before that?
That was a response to the police officers went and bombed the neighborhood in retaliation because they were being targeted on the streets and assassinating their police officers on the street. What we see in the film again is this endless cycle of violence. And it's not until Mateu comes in and then puts in place this bureaucratic system. It's like a machine that it's finally ended.
Mateu is articulate. He's tactical. He's very like by the book. He's like
analytical,
seemingly like very stone face, like he's not going to be bothered. On one hand, he openly admits to torturing people and says like, yeah, but on the other hand, he's also like, hey, I understand why they feel this way.
He compliments Ben-Hidi. He says, I admire his commitment. I admire his courage and commitment to his cause. He doesn't celebrate the cause, but he says, he's doing his job. I'm doing my job.
That whole side of the story asks a question about like effectiveness and legitimacy in these counter-terrorism measures. It's just mirroring what the FLN is doing in the film. Mateu, he actually wins. He, tactically speaking, from a military point of view, he wins. But how does the film end? It ends with Algiers' independence. So, it reframes terrorism or these actions and reactions. It frames them in this idea of like, is it worth it? Did it work? Mateu's like, I did my job. I crushed the FLN, but like, ultimately, like, what was the point of all of it?
It's all about who wins the political will.
Right.
Who has the will to continue fighting, to see it through until the very end. Everybody talks about in Vietnam, for example, that the Americans killed way more, unfortunately, Vietnamese people than Americans were killed, but we still perceive that we lost that war. Why? Well, body count actually doesn't have necessarily anything to do with political will. John Berger writes about this in the essay about Che Guevara, that when the world becomes so intolerable that you can no longer take it anymore, that's what actually generates the revolutionary. And as long as the world remains intolerable, there will be revolutionaries.
Ultimately, we're all very familiar with this word terrorism.
It's subjective.
It's right. That's the point of the Battle of Algiers.
He's taking you out of the subjective into a completely sort of pristine, objective viewpoint.
Right.
The French, they dehumanize themselves too. That's what the torture is, right? Like you're torturing somebody, like you're absolutely ruining your own humanity when you go and do that. Violent revolution is a dehumanizing activity. No matter which way you look at it, something looks like terrorism to you, it might look like freedom fighting to the other person. It's all violence. So no matter which way you shake it, people lose their humanity. They deny humanity, and then they also give up their own humanity.
When political language is not enough, when things get ramped up to a point where we can't talk about the problem any longer, that's when violence creeps in, because violence is the next step. And then what happens with violence? It just keeps getting ramped up. And then everyone starts losing. Everyone loses here. Ultimately, the FLN and the French military, they all commit terrible atrocities and suffer terrible atrocities. And you and I have talked about this more in today's political climate. When do we reach the limits of our attention to politics and our ability to conceptualize ideas that are in the news? When we pass that bandwidth limit, that's when political violence starts. And that's what we're seeing in this film.
It's showing you what the real cost of a revolution is, how dehumanizing it is, how violent it is, how nobody gets out of a revolution unscathed. I mean, it's war, right? So you could say, this film is arguing against revolution. I wouldn't want to be involved in something like this, but I think counterintuitively, the film is actually dangerous because by showing you what it really looks like, it shows you that it is a real possibility. It's not this romantic myth. It's not the Che Guevara t-shirt. It's not cool. It's actually not cool at all. But by doing that, by showing you what a revolution really looks like, it also shows you that it's possible. It's a real possibility. But ultimately, the most dangerous thing this film does is by telling a story completely stripped of an ideological standpoint, it helps you see where the ideology is operating in your own life. When you go through the discomfort of watching Battle for Algiers, the moral discomfort, the moral complexity and confusion, it kind of serves as a way of like waking you up. It gives you the responsibility for your own liberation.
Right.
Neorealism is less an aesthetic choice than an ethical choice.
We talked about kind of like feeling a sense of anxiousness or impending anxiety when you watch the film, when you think about the film. And I think for me, I have that feeling as well. And the reason is the fog, this idea that things become unclear. What this film is showing me is how just confusing and ambiguous it can become when things get escalated to this point politically. And the thing that gives me anxiety about it is that this keeps happening. If there's anything about the Battle of Algiers, it's like, well, it's going to show you what happened before, and it's going to show you what's going to happen next time.
Yeah.
And it also makes me feel kind of anxious about the world we live in. When political language, when discourse doesn't work anymore and we have to proceed to the next level, when it breaks down, what's in store for us? Pontecorvo just created this masterpiece that is essentially timeless because it could always become like this.
When you watch a film like the Battle of Algiers, when you go through that fog, it can radicalize someone to see this. Not in the sense that, oh, I want to commit acts of violence, although that could be an outcome. But suddenly now you have this gnosis. It teaches you how to look at your own world and your own reality better.
Yeah, like what are these frameworks that we have in place as culture and people over history, and like how do you question those? One of the beauties of the Battle of Algiers is that there's a lot of films and filmmakers that were influenced by this and took the Battle of Algiers in ways and tweaked it for their own films and made different kinds of films. But this movie touches anyone that watches it or anyone that tries to make something. This film can touch you in a way that can inform whatever it is that you're going to do.
It's asking you to operate from what Pontecorvo calls the dictatorship of truth. Use reality as a constraint. Don't try to bring some other idea or belief. Make it all from the world of the story.
Right. Radical authenticity.
This film reminds me in many ways of The Writer by Chloe Zhao, which I think is a work of neorealism. She embedded with this community. She involved the community, and they, like Sadi Youssef, they're not trying to make themselves look like something they're not. They're trying to make sure that they're portrayed as they really are. What is recognition? Recognition is wanting to be seen for who you actually are.
Right.
And I see a lot of parallels in The Writer.
I also think if you look at a movie like Soderbergh's Traffic, it's very much told in like a kind of neutral way about America's relationship with drugs. And Soderbergh is a champion of the Battle of Algiers. If you look at like City of God, the Brazilian film, or if you look at something like Platoon, they've all championed this film and they've all kind of taken little bits of it and tried to apply it to the stories they tell. And that's the beauty of the film, is that it can live on and inspire so many people through not only the core themes and ideas, but also the way that the movie was made.
Yeah, and I think this is a film that I think is what this podcast is about.
Yeah.
Authenticity is an ethical act, and I think that that's something that this show should be built upon.
Yeah, awesome.
All right, Bob. Well, listen, man, really wonderful conversation. I'm a little sad that we don't get to talk about this anymore because there's just so much to talk about with this movie, but I got to let it go. Listeners, if you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe. I always say, if you like the podcast, tell a friend. If you don't like it, tell an enemy, but please just tell someone. Be on the lookout for our YouTube channel. We'll probably be throwing up some shorts and stuff. Please share those around. By the way, reach out to us, message us, tell us if you like it, tell us if we're wrong, tell us your idea, tell us how you got radicalized. Share your stories. Please engage with us.
Recommend some films for us to talk about.
Yeah, is there a film that you guys want to hear, like that you would like us to discuss? We desperately want to hear back from our audience, so keep us looped in. Let's connect. Bob, thank you very much, man. I'll see you soon, okay?
You got it. Take care, man.